hope everyone is having a good morning, or I should say, at the very least, I hope you guys had a good night. Forgive the blurry-eyed look. I've been sitting at this desk all day, or I should say all night. I was working on something else, and it's funny. When I was younger, I used to write all the time. I had no issue writing, hundreds of pages of documents. Now, at the time, I wasn't necessarily doing anything else, so I could sit at home all day and do it. But I had this energy and drive that I could put to the task of sitting there and write. And I think ever since I've been doing videos, the faculty has some degree, I guess, weakened, just because the exchange that I have in this case is immediate. It's somewhat direct. I remember I asked Dor last night, he kind of made this point that he gets depowered when he's doing videos. And I was asking him, why does he get depowered? He was saying when he's on stage, he feels a particular way. I kind of feel that way when I do live videos. Even though, it may not be a huge number of people watching, I'm aware that there are going to be thousands of people that may watch a video. And in some cases, in one video, 300,000. So you're overtly aware that there are eyes on you, and the information that you're given is not necessarily scripted in advance, even though you know what you want to talk about. So there's an art to it, but there's also this kind of immediacy between the information kind of drops into your consciousness and the recall of the information. I'm trying not to say but it kind of comes along with it when you don't necessarily have the word immediately in that particular moment. I think I'm getting better at it though, so let's keep it moving. That's somewhat of a tangent, kind of besides the point. This video is going to deal with the debate between Cenk Uygur and Glenn Greenwald. Essentially, a Russiagate debate. I really like this debate. And I'm going to do something else. I'm going to give a shout out to Cenk Uygur. I'm going to take Glenn Greenwald up and say he's right. I don't agree with Uygur on the Glenn Greenwald, on the Russiagate stuff. I don't agree with Uygur on pushing his audience to vote for Hillary Clinton. I would imagine there's a host of things I don't agree with Uygur on. But one thing that I do appreciate is that he was willing to bring on people who disagreed with him. Not just willing to bring on people, he was also willing to have the debate itself. Him and Cal, him and what's the other gentleman's name? Aaron Matei. And in this case, him and Glenn Greenwald. Now, of all of these people, Glenn Greenwald is probably the most dangerous for Cenk Uygur to debate on this, because Glenn Greenwald is just absolutely amazing. But nevertheless, he brings him on the network, as opposed to networks like MSNBC that had a complete total blackout of anybody that had a contrary opinion on this particular issue. So I will give him credit on this. On the second point, he loses this debate. Now, I think he loses this debate because I don't think his hypothesis makes sense. I just don't think it necessarily pans out. Glenn Greenwald makes this case to him that your hypothesis of events don't necessarily pan out. I'm going to show certain clips in this. Now, Glenn and Cenk, I think, have a wrong hypothesis on one very particular issue dealing with sanctions. Meaning, why didn't Trump pass the sanctions on Russia? I think both of them are looking at this in a particular way that's somewhat off. Cenk is looking at it through the lens of somebody who's corrupt. Glenn is looking at it through the lens of somebody who has a certain ideology. I don't think either one of those perspectives are true. And so I'm going to give my explanation when I show that particular clip. So let's start. The first clip I'm going to deal with, Glenn makes the argument on why the conspiracy thing is bogus. Like, why on earth is this idea that Trump is somehow colluding with Russia in order to do favors? He's making this argument on why this doesn't necessarily make sense. So let's go to the video.
The most obvious brazen money laundering in American history, right in front of your eyes, if that's the case. But that's why I want to get you guys on the show and talk about it. And when I talked to Kyle well over a year ago, he said, no, that might be the case. And so, Glenn, if their money laundering is possible, well, then obviously the Russians would have enormous compromising information on Trump, which might give him the incentive to do the things that he has done on behalf of Russia. And I know that we'll have disagreements on that too.
So what's that? For me, this is the key, right? So I think there have been two principal kind of what I call conspiracy theories. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, I just mean that neutrally. Some conspiracy
It's a little
theories are
derogatory,
true.
but
No,
that's okay.
some conspiracy theories are true. There are people in prison for involving themselves in conspiracies. Conspiracies are real. So all I mean by that is a theory about people working in secret in concert for a corrupt goal. So one of them is the collusion over the election, which we're kind of pushing to the side because you say that was never really that important to you. We have small disagreements, but they're essentially small, and you believe the much bigger kind of conspiracy theory is that Putin has leverage over Trump that he can use to coerce or force Trump to take actions that is in Russia's interest at the expense of the U.S. Is that a fair summary of what you believe?
Yeah, that is a fair summary, yes.
Okay, so let me just address that and just lay out my view on that and then hear what you have to say on that. So first of all, you referred earlier to the Manafort prosecution that the Mueller team oversaw, and that had nothing to do, by the judge's own reckoning, with interference by the Russians in the election. That was completely unrelated. They investigated deeply Mueller's pre-2016 money laundering, failures to file lobbyist forms, all kinds of crimes that he was ultimately convicted for that had nothing to do with the original collusion theory, which I think strongly suggests that if Mueller was looking into Manafort's finances, there's certainly good reason to think he was looking into Trump's. But we're not going to know until the Mueller report is out whether he did. But this is the thing that is bothering me the most about this entire thing, this idea that Putin has leverage over Trump. If you look at the behavior of Trump since he's been in office, contrary to the prevailing wisdom and what this theory necessarily posits, the reality is that the Trump administration generally and Trump himself have repeatedly taken very belligerent and harmful actions, not to ancillary Russian interests, but to vital Russian interests. Right this minute, the Trump administration is trying to remove from power in Venezuela a longtime and very important ally of Putin's in a very geopolitically important and oil-rich country in Venezuela. He did something that Obama refused to do on the grounds that it would be too provocative to Putin, which I really praised Obama for, which was send lethal arms to the Ukrainians who were anti-Russian and fighting against Russia. I mean, you pretty much can't do anything worse to Putin than arm Ukrainians who are anti-Russian, given the history of Ukraine and what it almost did to Russia. That's why Obama refused to do it. He said, I'm not going to risk confrontation with Putin over something that's right in Putin's neighborhood, but not in ours. The thing that Trump did the most, that's probably the most damaging, and this is something he did personally, is he has been obsessed with badgering Germany and Angela Merkel, trying to get them to stop buying Russian natural gas, which is the most important thing to the Russian economy, and instead buy it from the United States on the grounds that, look, we're spending all this money on NATO to protect you, and you're buying and enriching Russia instead of us, something that Putin is indignant over for really good reason. And I could go on and on. They built up a naval presence in the Black Sea. They bombed Putin's ally in Syria, something that Obama also refused to do over and over. They expelled diplomats and imposed sanctions on oligarchs. Way more belligerent towards Russia than the Obama administration was, to Obama's credit. But I think how can you justify or reconcile all these things that Trump has done against the Kremlin's interests with this theory that Trump is controlled by Putin?
Yeah.
Yes. 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 If your theory, if your hypothesis of the case is that Donald Trump is being blackmailed, and he's being blackmailed and he's being controlled, Vladimir Putin has his hand in Donald Trump's ass and he's manipulating it with his fingers or something, then you need to show what he's doing for Vladimir Putin. Your theory hinges on that. And if people are showing things that are contrary to the interests of Vladimir Putin, then you have to at the very least admit that this kind of goes against your theory or your hypothesis. You're shaking your head. No, but everything that he just said there was absolutely true. And if all of those things are absolutely true, then you have a problem. How on earth is Donald Trump doing these things that are against the interests of Russia? while simultaneously being controlled by Russia? You have to answer for that. And this doesn't even get into the missile treaties. This thing of like the getting rid of the INF treaty, not to mention putting weapons in space. Those are things that the countries are dramatically against. Russia is not trying to have another missile war. I mean, you understand that, right? The country doesn't have the economy to even support that level of infrastructure or that level of spending for some kind of war in space. This is us deciding to do this. And these things are against Russian interests. So Cenk Uygur has to answer what Glenn Greenwald has to say here. So let's hear him out.
So I do believe that some of the things that you talk about are against Russia's interests, and I think that that's a valid and fair point. And I've had that conversation again with a number of people on the show. So the German pipeline, I actually think, is probably the best example. So on the other hand, he's also done incredibly strange things on behalf of Russia. So. And in regards to Russia, so first of all, right after the election, he sends Eric Prince to go have a secret meeting with the Russians in Seychelles Island. Regular people don't do that. Presidents don't send mercenaries to go have secret meetings with other government officials. That's crazy.
That's not really true, though. I mean, Cenk Uygur is wrong on that. I mean, there's history with this. In fact, maybe not a mercenary, but back channels, yes. Back channels. Nixon, believe it or not, had a back channel in order to prolong the Vietnam War. Nixon wanted to use the Vietnam War, saying he had a secret plan to get us out of Vietnam. All the time, having this kind of back channel with the government in order to keep the war going, so he wouldn't sign a deal with LBJ, who was trying to end the war before his presidency ended. There's tapes where LBJ is talking, he's saying it's traitors. Essentially, Nixon committed treason in this. Couldn't bring this to light, however, but it did happen. Another case that took place, the Gipper, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan also had a back channel dealing with the Jimmy Carter thing. If you remember, Ronald Reagan comes into office during a hostage crisis with Iran. Reagan's back channel essentially had this thing of, look, deal with us when we get in office, which essentially made Jimmy Carter look extraordinarily bad, and those hostages were released the moment that Reagan took office. Back channels do exist in presidential races. I'm sorry, you're wrong on that. Maybe not mercenaries per se, but for whatever reason, whatever relationship Donald Trump had with them, yes, back channels do exist. That's not necessarily off the wall.
So I don't know what rational explanation there could possibly be for that. Then when he's in meetings with Putin, he won't allow American translators into meetings. That is absolutely nuts. It's clearly covering something. After one of the meetings, he takes the translator's notes. So he's covering something up, so that's part of it.
Your perspective is that he's covering something up because you have a perspective that he's covering something up because you have a perspective that he's covering something up. This is somewhat of circular reasoning. I mean, ultimately, you're looking at him through a particular lens, and that lens says Donald Trump is corrupt, and everything that Donald Trump does gets stuffed into some kind of lens on that case. I've made this point before because I think this point is somewhat true. I just made the point that back channels do exist, and even in this case, Ronald Reagan had conversations with Gorbachev that were somewhat off the books, meaning they were talking without necessarily having anybody with them. They wanted to talk in private. In the case where Donald Trump believes that people are leaking information in order to topple his presidency, would he be a little bit suspicious of translators? Go further. If you believe that the president, when he was running for office, that the previous government or the previous government that was in office, meaning the Obama administration, used a Russia allegation in order to spy on his campaign, if you, Donald Trump, you believe that, then you may be a little bit, let's say, sketchy with information going out. I guess I'm saying I don't necessarily know if that's true, but Cenk Uygur doesn't necessarily know if it's true that Vladimir Putin is giving Donald Trump instructions either. this is his hypothesis. He doesn't know this. He's just asserting that this is somehow nefarious. He doesn't know it.
Now, in terms of the actions, look, one of the things he did, and the thing that he was most insistent on was no sanctions on the Russians. And the Senate votes 98-2, then he turns around and goes, God damn it, I don't want to do these sanctions, but now I have to because they could override his veto. And then he delays doing the sanctions. So what's a possible theory as to why he would be insistent on not doing the sanctions, insistent that the Russians didn't interfere, didn't do anything wrong, and have all these secret meetings with Putin, maybe potentially withdraw from Syria after having yet another secret meeting with Putin 2 weeks earlier than that. So one theory is, yeah, the Russians have compromising information on him, and from time to time, Putin will tell him, do this, and he'll do it. But he's so damn stupid, he doesn't even know what Russia's other interests are. Putin has to lay it out for him. If Putin doesn't lay it out for him, he's like, oh, okay, I don't know, I want the energy. I'm against Germany.
By the way, I kind of want to point out something that you should have noticed. Glenn Greenwald asked Cenk Uygur, what are the things that Vladimir Putin is getting Donald Trump to do? He says, well, he doesn't allow people to take notes, and that Donald Trump had a back channel. But these aren't things that Donald Trump is doing for Russia per se. He asked you a very basic question. What are the things that you believe that Donald Trump is doing on behalf of Russia? So finally we get to the one real thing in this case, and that's sanctions. So let's hear him make his pitch. I just wanted to point out that the question that Glenn Greenwald asked, it wasn't a list of things in the way that Cenk Uygur talked about it. It's really one, sanctions.
Doing the pipeline with Russia. Now you can say, hey, that's not a great theory, but it is a theory, and it is certainly possible. And I don't know of any theory, but you're on the show, so you tell me, of why Trump would desperately try to keep all these meetings with the Russians secret.
Okay. So first of all, I think